Dr. Steinhauer.
Thank you. We're going to have Mr. Galetko come up and talk a little bit about the budget to give you an update of where we are at this moment, and he has a few slides.
He did great last
Oh, I was recording multiple.
Thank you, Ms. Flesher.
Thank you, Mr. Stengel. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Draft 8 of the budget. Ms. Fleischer, you stole my thunder before we get started. Thank you, Dr. Steinhauer, for stepping in for me last week. I think he did a fantastic job. We have made some positive movements in the past week. However, we still have some significant unknowns that will come to light here by the end of the month. So this is just a quick update for tonight. Next slide, Mr. Stengel. So just a reminder to the board and community what is impacting our budget this year. Obviously, inflation, common level ratio case, fair funding lawsuit, our healthcare figure, which comes out on March 31st, our continuing negotiations with teachers, the replacement of 15 retirements, some special ed costs that continue to rise, our limitation by Act 1. We had a gift from the governor. Hopefully our legislature comes through and approves that state funding. That would mean an extra $1 million to our school districts, which would be very helpful. And then our staffing meetings, which are happening these next 2 weeks here in March, will help set some of the stage for the employees that will be here next school year. We get an assessment disc about the first week of May, and we will continue to work through our English as a second language, students, transportation, and outside tuition. So all these determining factors will help us close the original gap in the budget that you saw last week. Next slide, Mr. Stengel. So we took some action this week to increase revenue and decrease expenditures in these particular areas. So our Social Security and PSERS reimbursements are based on the salaries that we have. Because some of the salaries were reduced, those reimbursements were changed. We're seeing positive news for earned income tax and realty transfer tax, along with delinquent tax. We saw a slight uptick in some of our state subsidies, and our federal pass-through numbers, we know pretty solidly what they will be. On the expense side, we refined salaries, we refined benefits, we've reduced some overtime costs. We got some good news from our insurance broker, Mr. Kelly. Our cyber insurance number will stay the same, thanks to Mr. Stengel's work and our employees for instituting multi-factor authentication this year. We continue to have a great mod, which has kept keeping our workers' comp numbers down, so we reduced that, and we refined some tuition reimbursement expenditures. So that is what we worked on this past week. Next slide, Mr. Stengel. Just again to remind everybody the value that was added to this budget. We've made some significant investments in our children in the current fiscal year, and they are planned to continue in this iteration of the budget for the 23-24 fiscal year. We continue to fund our school resource officer. We've added girls wrestling, boys volleyball, our educational softwares and ebooks line item. All of our employee groups are now at $15 an hour. We have included monies for DEI initiatives, and we've moved some maintenance and technology expenditures that were typically in capital reserve are now moved to the operating budget. As far as staff added this school year, 1 school nurse, 3 special education teachers, 3 elementary teachers, 6 support staff. We continue to have a teacher on special assignment for the implementation of Schoology, and another teacher on special assignment for the English language arts implementation. Next page, Mr. Stengel. So the first blush of the budget last week showed us about $9 million out. Through the aforementioned adjustments, we've closed the gap by about $400,000 this week. And let's still remember we have some very significant impact issues still hanging out there that we will kind of clean up over the next 2 or 3 weeks here to get us to a balanced budget. Also, to be noted, this projection does not include the governor's proposed budget, which would bring another $1 million to the district, nor any kind of tax increase. So that is the deficit we're working with currently, and like I said, through staffing and through some more refinements, we will continue to whittle that number down. Next slide, Mr. Stengel. So just an iteration of the budget with the additional millions of dollars from the state. So we'll keep our ear towards Harrisburg. There are some pending bills about maybe extending or changing the state fiscal year different from the school fiscal year, and there's been some bills brought forward both by the governor and the legislature regarding school funding in the school funding case. So we'll watch that very closely as we try to put our budget together for April and May.
Rob, if you wouldn't mind just mentioning about fund balance.
Certainly. So there's been some flash by the new Auditor General regarding the amount of fund balance that districts are keeping. There was his initial review of fund balance were districts that applied for and increased tax, applied for exceptions and increased taxes while having fund balances maybe over 20% of their expenditures, which here would be over $20 million. So he called those 18 schools out, particularly about a month or so ago. There's been some continued conversation about that is happening through funding schools this year, and that's a lot of school districts, including us in 2016. That fund balance helped us carry through until the tax dollars in the state budget were settled during the impasse to pay our bills. So that's why schools need to have some sort of rainy day fund. So that is a hot topic. Keeping the fund balance, the Auditor General refers to a maximum of 8%. Our school board policy calls for 6%. So we're living between that 6 and 8% category currently, and that seems to be his recommendation going forward.
Can I also, I had heard that, that it looked like that court decision about school funding was not going to be appealed, so that means now the governor and the legislature do need to roll up their sleeves and figure out.
That would be great, Ms. Fleischer. There's been 2 instances where similar cases were brought both in New Jersey and Ohio, and both were over 20 years old, and they haven't implemented those changes. It would be wonderful for us and the Commonwealth as a whole as far as education. We won't hold our breath on that, but what the governor has proposed for school funding, I think levels the playing field very much so. So the way the House and Senate are made up, I feel very hopeful what we'll get next year.
Mr. Galecko, the recommendation from the Auditor General to keep fund balance between 6 and 8%, is that unassigned fund balance?
That is unassigned fund balance. So his words towards assigned fund balance was that districts shifted money to the assigned fund balance so they could continue to raise taxes. Some of our surrounding neighbors have $20, $30, $40 million in fund balance, which is for a myriad of reasons, but that is stacking taxpayer money, in my opinion.
So we've discussed this a little bit at prior board meetings, that one of the practices of the district historically has been when there is a big capital expense kind of on the horizon, the field turf, the track, the rock pile, stuff like that, is to grow the fund balance and sort of assign a portion of that to the capital project on the horizon so that we don't have to finance it and say, reap some savings for the district along the way. Do we potentially run afoul of that recommendation by, sort of employing that practice moving forward?
I don't believe so, Mr. Weiland. When we get to our fund balance over the last 20 years has never been more than about 14 million.
Yeah.
So, we've never run into that 20 to 30%, $20 million to $30 million range. So I don't believe it would be an issue for this district. The board did vote earlier in January not to go out for the exceptions, and that was an indicator of districts that the Auditor General was exploring. So I think that kept us out of the news in that.
So it's the confluence of all of those things, excessive unassigned fund balance, max tax, and asking for exceptions. Those are the ones that are.
Yeah, those are the current 18 that they're, being mentioned in the news.
Gotcha.
Yep.
Thank you.
Mr. Galecko, the $850,000 that was borrowed from fund balance in prior years has been paid back this year. Can you speak to that a little bit?
So our current projections do this year's 22-23 budget. The board minimized the tax increase by using $850,000 in fund balance to balance the budget. At the close of February, our projections do say that we will pay that $850 back this year and have monies available in the future for future capital projects. You are correct.
Thank you.
Yes. Two more slides, Mr. Stengel. So continued steps, we continue to remain out of balance, and again, these are some steps to consider as we go forward. Consider a tax increase, consider increases for charges for services such as rentals of our buildings. We will be analyzing our staffing at the secondary and elementary level over the next 2 weeks, reviewing our programming and offerings, and we'll continue to reduce our expenditures and refine our revenues. Now is the time we kind of go line by line through our 4,000 accounts and make sure everything is in line. The close of March, we'll get a more accurate projection of how our revenues will turn out and how we can project the future. So that will kind of define where we go in April and May. We have one last slide, Mr. Stengel. As a reminder to the community that this Wednesday will be our annual budget forum here in room D205 at 7 p.m. Come join myself and Dr. Steiner as we take a deep dive into this year's budget and our process. This recording, along with all of my others, will be linked on the About Us page of our website under Budget, and they're always available on the district website. And as always, I'm always available by email and phone for questions. Thank you all.
Thank you.
So ends my report.